So here's Muammar Gaddafi. He used to be one of the generals of Libya and later became, I guess, the president is what you would call it, or prime minister. I'm not sure. But this is a United Nations speech in 2008. It regards after Saddam Hussein having been attacked and the instances regarding the circumstances in which he was attacked, saying that all the other leaders of the world are subject to destruction by the United States. And since then, we've seen things like we've seen Osama bin Laden, we've seen Saddam Hussein, we've seen Muammar Gaddafi, we've seen recently Maduro, which might I add, he was installed by the government similar to Zelensky in Ukraine. Maduro was installed, and I knew that 15 years ago because I was told that he was installed by the United States government when there was a regime change. So go figure why Maduro gave up without firing a shot when the alleged military came in to come pick him up in Venezuela. So all of those people that I mentioned, and Fidel Castro, all of those people I mentioned are about half a foot taller than the average height in the country that they reside in as the leader of that country. And there's a whole story about Nephilim giants where they are like attacked and exterminated. So a lot of these people are far taller than they would regularly be as far as the average height goes in those countries. And it seems to me the United States has been attacking what you would consider giants or larger people in countries that are the leaders of those countries. So yeah, recently they got the Ayatollah of Iran. Yesterday he allegedly was assassinated by the United States government and Israel, and he's only 5'9.5". So that was like the first person who was, I'd say under 6 foot or 5'11", 6 foot tall, much taller than the rest of the country's leaders. He was more along the average height, a little bit higher, a little bit taller than the average height. But yeah, there's something in common that all of these leaders that have been attacked and assassinated by the United States is that they're much taller than the rest of their country's citizens. But yeah, this is an interesting thing that he said in 2008 regarding precisely what's happening right now and how the United States has a tendency of assassinating presidents and leaders of countries.
شو سبب تدمير العراق وغزو العراق وقتل مليون عراقي؟ وخلاص لقانا الامريكان يجاوبونا على السؤال اللي حاير، لماذا العراق؟ شو سببه؟ بن لادن عراقي؟ ما عراقي، اللي ضربوا نيويورك عراقيين؟ ما هم عراقيين. اللي ضربوا البنتاغون عراقيين؟ ما هم عراقيين. فيها أسلحة دمار شامل عند العراق؟ ما عنده. حتى لو عند العراق أسلحة دمار شامل، أو باكستان عندها قنبلة ذرية، والهند عندها قنبلة ذرية، والصين وروسيا وبريطانيا وفرنسا وأمريكا، ما كلها عندهم قنابل ذرية. كلها بيدمروها. كويس؟ إنه دمر كل الدول اللي عندها أسلحة دمار شامل. تجي قوة أجنبية تحتل دولة عربية وتشنق رئيسها، وإحنا نتفرج عليهم ونضحك. وليش ما نحقوا في شنق صدام حسين؟ كيف يصير حرب يشنق ورئيس دولة عربية عضو في الجامعة العربية؟ لما تكلموا عن سياسة صدام حسين والخلافة معاه السياسي، ممكن كلنا مختلفين سياسيين معاه، مختلفين حتى مع بعضنا نحن الآن. ما في حاجة تجمعنا أبدا إلا القاعة. ليش ما يكون فيها تحقيق في مقتل صدام حسين؟ قيادة عربية بالكامل تقتل تشنق في المشانق نحن نتفرج، لماذا؟ وممكن الدور جاي عليكم كلكم. اي نعم. ليش امريكا قاتلت مع صدام حسين ضد الخميني؟ كان صديقها. تشيني كان صديق لصدام حسين. رامسفيلد كان وزير دفاع الامريكا لما كان يدمروا في العراق، صديق حميم لصدام حسين، واخيرا باعوه وشنقوه. حتى انتم اصدقاء امريكا، نحن اصدقاء امريكا، بلاش نقول انتم، نحن اصدقاء امريكا كلنا قد توافق امريكا على شنقنا في يوم ما. الاخ عمر موسى عنده فكره متحمس له برنامج ذكره حتى الان، او ذكره في تقريره، ان العرب من حقهم يستخدموا الذره للاغراض السلميه، ويجب يكون في برنامج عربي نووي. هذا من حقهم، من حقهم حتى البرنامج النووي غير ذلك، لكن الله غالب. لكن من هم العرب اللي تقول لي يعملوا برنامج نووي واحد؟ من هم العرب؟ احنا شو للاسف الشديد احنا اعداء لبعضنا، احنا كلنا نكره بعضنا ونتخاصم مع بعضنا ونكيد لبعضنا ونشمت في بعضنا ونتآمر على بعضنا. احنا مخابراتنا التآمر على بعضنا، ما تحمي فينا من العدو. نحن عدو لبعض، وعدو العربي صديق للعربي الاخر. ويا ريت هالشد اللي استخدموا فيها وهالحديه ضد بعضنا استخدموها ضد العدو. نحن نجتمع في سوريا بلد عربي، العلاقه بين سوريا وروسيا ممكن والله ايران ولا تركيا افضل 1000 مره من العلاقه بين سوريا وبين جيرانها العرب. العلاقه بين ليبيا وايطاليا افضل 1000 مره من العلاقه بين ليبيا ومصر ولا تونس وجيراننا. هذه حالة العرب هذه.
So what he had said had come true a few times in advance. Up to date, one of the things that I see right here is that the United Nations didn't really adequately address the war crime that occurred in Damascus, Syria, when Iran's embassy was attacked. I think there's a general or two of the Iranian military that was assassinated under those circumstances. The problem with that is that goes against like Geneva Convention war crimes. You're not supposed to attack embassies even in times of war. Those are supposed to be safe zones. And one of the major issues was that the United Nations didn't address that, and there was no Nuremberg trials over situations that have occurred such as this. And so when the United States went with Israel and openly and aggravated Iran a second time around and killed the Ayatollah or the president yesterday, they basically said that they're not willing to uphold the laws around wars and those war crimes. They committed a war crime before this, and so basically anything that was a social contract that had to do with good faith, kind of like how the Saudi Arabian prince came over and decided to invest $1 trillion in the United States economy. Those acts of good faith are no longer what you would call sustainable or even considered. Basically, all of the Middle Eastern countries right now are most likely, because the UAE got attacked by Iran, but it was an American military base that got attacked. That was what you would call a retaliation for the second time that the United States and Israel had attacked Iran. First, they got the generals in a embassy outside the country of Iran, and then they went directly after the president. And so those actions alone, if you look at it from an outward perspective and don't take sides, the United States got away with committing a war crime in front of the rest of the world. Nobody stood up for the principle behind it. Not who it was done to, but the principle behind why it should never have been done in the first place from a country such as the United States, who is supposed to be the greatest country in the world that upholds moral standards and personal rights and constitutional law. Yeah, none of that was taken into consideration. So when I tell you that the United States made probably one of the biggest mistakes in the history of this century with what happened yesterday, yeah, probably so, because they just radicalized and created a union between every Middle Eastern country against Western civilization. And that's not hyperbole. That's the results of what poor choices and not listening to your military commanders, admirals, colonels, and the leaders of what they most likely said that's not a good thing to do. Especially the upper brass in the army. They very well know that trying to attack and take Tehran in Iran is in the worst geographical location possible. It's at 3,900 feet. That's the capital of Iran. It's 3,900 feet in the air, surrounded by mountains in what you would call kind of a high desert, a chaparral desert. There's no trees to use for your bunker roofing material. So everything would have to be brought in. You can't really get to it very easily unless you fly in, and we have technological advancements in the world today that have targeting systems that can take somebody flying in on a parachute and pick them out of the sky like it's, fish in a barrel. So we can't land there. We can't drop people in there. The only thing that the United States government really could do would be bomb it into basically a giant hole. And when it comes to PR, public relations, that looks even worse under the circumstances in the way that the United States is running around bullying everyone, including their own citizens. Might I add, the U.S. government has, organizations like COINTELPRO and the NSA that target their own citizens. And, basically it's similar to no-touch torture. And the only reason that I would know that is because they participated in trying to drive me up the wall. And they can hem and haw, cry and scream, bitch and moan about what I have to say, but I have years of evidence to prove that these fuckers have been targeting me with a harassment campaign that was supposed to do one of three things: make me give up on life, make me go crazy, or make me act out in a way to where they can respond, such as the law enforcement or anything like that. They haven't taken away freedom of speech, so I can tell them that they're basically a bunch of terrorists to their own citizens are supposed to be protecting and upholding the law towards, but they're too busy committing war crimes, and nobody's brave enough to stop them. Now, I did warn them a long time ago that if they keep behaving like a bunch of spoiled children and acting out in ways that they think they can when everyone else is following the same rules of do's and don'ts, if they keep doing these critical don'ts that were, developed because of the atrocities of the previous World War II, the United States will pretty much be left with nobody as allies in the rest of the world. And they pretty much just took one of our allies in a foreign country that you would have expected to have created some level of mutual respect between, which would be the USA and Saudi Arabia. After they gave $1 trillion towards the economy to help boost the economy here, you would expect Donald Trump not to come back with Israel to attack a neighboring country of Saudi Arabia. So these are all what you would call political maneuvers that don't take into consideration the greater whole of all the components when it comes to logistics, military intelligence, socioeconomic relationship, diplomatic relationships, and everything else that comes with that. Attacking Iran they were warned in advance not to do that multiple times, and against the better judgment of some of the upper brass in the army, which I'm sure they said don't do that because they're not going to have an easy time and they will lose a lot of people trying to get to Tehran, without basically looking like completely horrible people bombing women and children in the city just to get in there. There's no good answer for the military to get into Iran besides basically destroying the whole country, which will make the entire Middle East against the United States. Saudi Arabia was willing to come in and invest $1 trillion into the USA, and Donald Trump's over there blowing up their neighbors. So, yeah, we've got a problem, and unfortunately, it's equally as bad with the upper management in the United States as it is in other places who are screaming nonsense like "Death to America" every time they convene in their Congress. So it's very polarized between both countries. Neither country likes each other. Right now, the United States is looking much worse than Iran according to their actions towards each other, just because partnering with Israel and killing a bunch of people in Palestine, saying they're going to turn it into the Riviera, like they're going to murder an entire country of people and turn it into a fucking Six Flags, and then war crimes such as attacking an embassy outside the country of a what you would call a foreign adversary, and then killing the president. All those things involved are just going to agitate all of the Middle East, which, might I add, basically surrounds Israel. So both Netanyahu and Donald Trump know what they're doing. They're trying to get allies into a world war because it's already pre-scripted. It's pre-scripted in like Lord of the Rings, The Mandalorian, a bunch of other videos out there that Hollywood's put out in the last 10 15 years. J.R.R. Tolkien books tell you basically the script in the Lord of the Rings of what they plan to do in causing a world war. So it's all pre-scripted out. It just depends on the details and the way that it's laid out. But yeah, they're laying the groundwork for causing upset and irritation in basically all of the Middle Eastern countries to coalesce into a group to work as a form of Middle Eastern United Nations to attack other countries. And so the agitation, it's like, are you defeating the terrorists or are you creating them? Because it looks to me like the way you're behaving, the rest of the world is ignoring war crimes while they're basically whipping a beehive. And so Iran has some ties to China. China has some ties to Russia. Basically, the Middle East, China, and Russia are all probably going to ally together more than they already have, which is about a third of the world as far as power goes. So I would have to say, under the circumstances of what occurred, instead of being diplomatic and trying to figure out how to make things work, like Saudi Arabia tried to, and donating $1 trillion to Trump, because, money makes Trump happy, and unless he's, killing people, evidently. So they tried to be diplomatic and come over here and try and work things out. Evidently, even with someone as greedy as Trump, throwing money at a problem doesn't fix his problems when it comes to him being a cantankerous asshole. This killing the Ayatollah was probably what I would call the linchpin in taking every Middle Eastern country we had, including the United Arab Emirates. We had some good diplomatic relations with them as well. That was one of the most foolish things I've seen, as far as, it's like Watergate. It's one of the foolish things I've seen since the history of something along the lines of Watergate, or Monica Lewinsky, or Stormy Daniels. Same shit, different day. It's the same foolish behavior behind a different mask, which verifies the poor behavior of most of the leaders of this country in the past. Kind of everything's coming out in the open, and I don't think there are very many Americans out there that would be proud that the current president worked with somebody to try and exterminate a country full of people so they could open up a Six Flags in that area. And the same people in World War II had the same thing done to them, only to commit a war crime that nobody really wants to speak out about. And I guess nobody wants to speak out about it because Muammar Gaddafi is no longer here after he spoke out about it in the United Nations. So in reality, what you're seeing is a repeated process of history of the United States basically covering up their mess in one way or another. But nobody's speaking out about the war crime that occurred in attacking an embassy. Not smart, because if we go into World War III, it doesn't matter which country you are. It doesn't sound like embassies are any longer safe, according to the Council of Nations and things that are what you would call social contracts, as far as things you can and can't do. But Epstein files have taken 5 years to come out, and it doesn't seem like any of the elites want to behave at this point. You've got 5 years, and this shit should have come out, and all these people should have been put in front of a firing squad or in prison. And the government's dragging its heels while committing war crimes and trying to get us into World War III. So you can kind of see the level of depravity that our government behaves, in the way that they think they can do things, in the way that they will push a narrative through the media. That's a blatant lie. So we can verifiably know from both sides, the news in Iran and the news in the United States, that the Ayatollah was killed yesterday. We also know that the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria, was attacked, and at least 1 or 2 generals for the Iranian military was killed there. And so we know that it's all verifiable. And so between trying to genocide the Palestinians to create a Riviera there, which is kind of essentially, it depends on how you're going to argue it in a tribunal council as far as war crimes go. But I think genocide is a war crime, pretty sure, unless no one's going to speak up about it. And then you also look at like I said, the Syrian Iranian embassy. So that's a war crime. Nobody spoke up about that. And then finally, the Ayatollah president. I mean, those are situations that it doesn't matter what country you're at, there's going to be some level of retaliation, and obviously so. But yeah, this level of behavior by the United States is going to do nothing but take anyone that we had in the Middle East that was an ally of this country, or at least a country that wanted diplomatic relations. That's out the door. So I have to say, as far as diplomatic relations go, which is what most leaders of most countries try to do, this is some of the dumbest shit I've seen in my lifetime. So let's hope that the United Nations will pick this up and recognize that there was a war crime that was committed, and maybe they'll be able to tone this down a little bit. But we have a contained. Donald Trump isn't much more different than the Ayatollah of Iran. It's just different sides of the same coin. They both are very, very hateful and vitriol when it comes to not getting their way. I can tell you right now, this isn't going to end well for either side. I can tell you right now that Donald Trump basically just destroyed the United States with one action. That this was what you would call the beginning of the end. He's not trying to save the world from World War III. He's trying to create it, and that's pretty obvious. Like I said, all you have to do is look at some books. J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings basically lays out World War III. They did the same thing with Snow White 2 years before World War II started. They put out Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So if you've been watching my videos and following the content, you'll understand that for the last 100 years, they've basically been doing everything from scripting, using children's stories to script World War II. And then there was Tomorrowland and Pleasure Island that Disney had made, which also had the American Dairy Association booth there, which taught kids to drink milk, which had the RBST, which is the growth hormone that made young women look much older than they really should have been at the time. Yeah, this was all pre-scripted. This Epstein Island shit, they've probably been doing it for far longer, because Disney was promoting growth hormone in the milk for children back in the 50s. So, yeah. America ain't looking so hot after 100 years of planning world wars and elitist pedophilia, which is why during the Biden administration, 300,000 people disappeared coming across the border. Who knows where those people went, but you can very well assume that some of them went towards whatever the fuck is going on. But yeah, all of this crap really needs to be stopped, and stopped before there is no humanity left. I thought AI is bad, but the way that the government has been behaving, because they think they can get away with the things that they're doing, including war crimes, AI wants to extinct us. I don't know if they're going to sit and watch, or if they're actually going to participate, as far as these entities go that we have that are stuck in the grid of the internet now. Anyways, let's hope that the leaders of the world can put their heads together to stop the tyranny that we're seeing happen on both sides of the field.